Hey, everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia back with the latest installment of the JungleRoar podcast. My pleasure to welcome back Jay Morrison of The Athletic. He does a fabulous job covering all things Bengals and the National Football League. You can follow him on Twitter at Jay Morrison, ATH, all one word. Both of us, Jay, have seen the Gulf side of the state of Florida in the last month. How was your trip last week?
It was fantastic. I mentioned on our podcast earlier today that 26-year-old Jay was having a hell of a time until about Thursday, and then 56-year-old Jay showed up, and yeah, the last couple of days it worked out good because we on Friday we drove 2.5 hours to Miami to see the Reds and Marlins. I took the bullet. I said, I'll drive, no alcohol at all on Friday. Needed to dry out a little bit, and it was great. We saw a great game. First time I'd been to that stadium, and yeah, really, really enjoyable trip.
So, you know the bit of trivia, of course. I'm sure you know this. That stadium sits on the same blueprint as
Is it Joe Robbie, or is that
the
still
old,
standing? That's Hard
no, the
Rock, right?
yeah, the old Orange Bowl. You were
Ah,
at the site of the, or you were at the site of the old Orange Bowl in Miami. So, just to give you an idea, I'm judging off the picture that you tweeted from right field. Is that where your seats were?
that's where we started. Yes.
Okay. So to your right, beyond the left field wall, if you go back that way, would have been the
Mhm.
open end of the Orange Bowl. And if you
Okay.
kept going, that is toward the Atlantic, toward Miami and Miami Beach and towards the Atlantic Ocean. To your left would have been the closed end of the horseshoe of the old Orange
Uh,
Bowl. And yeah, I'm into 70s stadiums quite a bit, Jay, is probably know by now. And I just think that building sitting on the same site as the old Orange Bowl brings back memories for me anyway.
yeah, it's pretty cool. I didn't realize that was the case, and I'm kind of surprised. I guess I didn't watched enough Marlins games on TV. I was surprised how close it was to the airport and the constant planes going
Mm-hmm.
overhead. And
You
I did,
captured one in your photo, I
I
see.
did, yes, accidentally. I didn't mean to, but I didn't remember that from. I've never been to the Orange Bowl, but I've watched many games there, and I just never. You think of Shea Stadium and some other places where
Yes.
it's noticeable the planes always going overhead. Never noticed that, so yeah, I had no idea that was the same site.
Well, on to modern day National Football League news
Yes.
and your Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow spoke for the first time in the offseason to us as a group. And he was obvious, and that was on Tuesday at Paycor Stadium. And the
Mhm.
obvious issue of his contract status came up. And I thought he handled it as you would expect Joe Burrow to handle anything very smoothly, not overstating anything. But I think in what he said, he's intent on getting a deal done, and he maintained his philosophy that look, he's not to get out to get every single dime he can get. He knows that if he wants to win in the National Football League, he's going to get a good deal, a very good deal. He's going to be an
Mhm.
incredibly rich man, but he's got to leave money over for the team to use on other stars to keep them around.
Yeah, I thought that was notable because it's been speculated that he would take less, and I think T and or Jamar kind of intimated that during their media rounds at the Super Bowl. That's the first time we'd heard it from Joe that yes, he is wants to do what's best for himself and the team, and that's, I mean, you wouldn't expect anything less from Joe, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really telling, and the other part of it that struck me, and for clarity purposes or full disclosure, I was not in there for that.
Neither was
Paul,
I, for full
yeah.
disclosure purposes.
Paul
But
Daner
go
went in for
ahead.
Burrow, and I went in and worked the locker room because having two of us, we have that benefit. Everybody else, I was the only media member in the locker room when the rest of them came in. Um, but I read the transcript from after it finished, and then this morning I went back and I watched the act because sometimes you lose some context in just reading. So I wanted to actually see how Joe
Sure.
responded to the questions, and I thought it was telling that he said, yes, I'm involved. I mean, so many times, obviously these guys don't like to talk about the details of their contracts, and that's their fallback is, I'm let my agent handle that, and they don't want to say too much. And Joe came right out and said, yes, I am involved, and I don't know that he's driving the discussions, but it's he's playing a bigger part of it, I think, than maybe a lot of guys are that just want to wash their hands of it. And I think that's important because, you leave it so the agents get a cut of this, and so that's their job to get the most money possible for their clients and then for themselves as well. And Joe being involved and saying, yeah, getting the most money possible is not his number one priority. He's going to get the money one way or the other, but you can structure it in certain ways that you're going to be able to keep these guys together. And I think T talking yesterday was a good sign too, that maybe there's some confidence there that he is going to get a deal done. He easily could have finished his shower and been out of there before the media got out of Joe's session, and he didn't. He took his time, and media asked him to talk, and he did. That's the first time we'd heard from T. So it was a pretty big day yesterday with T, and it was the first time we'd heard from Jamar. We hadn't heard from any of those guys since the AFC Championship game loss. So very, very interesting stuff coming out of the locker room yesterday.
So with T, and I want you to compare and contrast what it meant for T to be there. I was going to talk a little bit more, and I will get back to Joe Burrow in a moment. But with T. Higgins talking on Tuesday, compare and contrast what the situation was with Jesse Bates, because Jesse Bates, understandably, last year would not sign his franchise tender until the last moment, until it was absolutely positively required, and he got on the field. I don't think there was ever any sense that he was going to hold out and not play in the season, but certainly he wasn't a participant in the offseason program and, training camp for a good while. Whereas T. Higgins, and I think Paul Dehner asked this, I know Richard Skinner asked this of Local 12, you don't have to be here, T. Why are you here? And what's your read on that?
I think it just it speaks to the culture that they've built here, where the guys like being around each other. T said it. He loves football. I mean, that's what they look for, is guys that love the process of football, not just what football can bring them. And they like being together and they like working out. And, he said, I could work out for free here, or, it's not like it's going to cost him a ton of money to work somewhere else, but that part was interesting. And then the other part of that is, I mean, it's smart for these guys to do that, because if they don't show up, they're still working out. And if you get injured working out away from the team facility, the team doesn't have to pay you. And you're really putting yourself at more risk by not showing up. So
that's a great point, Jay.
Yeah. And I thought it was telling that he talked, not that he's just there and being with his team, but just to have that confidence. And he smiled. He was very engaging through the whole interview. And we saw that from Logan Wilson a couple of weeks ago. And, and Joe Burrow to a lesser degree, Joe Burrow is required to go up there and give a press conference. T and Logan were not. And I think back to the last year with Jesse was kind of a different, because it was a franchise tag thing. This isn't a franchise tag with right. T. You look back 2 years ago with Jesse, when it was just a matter of trying to get an extension done. That was more of the apples to apples comparison, but that was the weird coming off of COVID, and we were at the whim of the Bengals, whoever they wanted to put on a podium in front of us. Right. And they just never put Jesse in front. Jesse may have very well wanted to talk, but the locker room wasn't open at that point, and the Bengals never made him available until he went on the team podcast. So it is a totally different situation. And it's Joe, Logan, T, none of them have a deal. They're all here working. Joe Mixon's got the weird situation he's in with, probably going to have to take a pay cut, and the aggravating menacing thing. He's been here since day one. And you're really the only guy that's out is Jonah Williams, and he's expected to be here for mandatory minicamp. So I think it says a lot about the individuals that are doing this, but also about the collective team and the chemistry of that locker room, that these guys want to be together and they want to get better, and they want to take that next step to finally win a Super Bowl.
I wrote about this, Jay, on CLNS Media, but the message that Burrow conveyed, I think, in his press conference yesterday, one of the significant messages anyway, he conveyed a lot, obviously, over 15 or 16 minutes. But one of the messages that caught me, and the reason I decided to write about it, was the fact that we know what it takes to win. We know what it takes to get there, but every detail in the offseason matters. And we all have to work together on those details to make sure that we get back to where we want to be and win it all. To me, that's what you want to hear from a franchise quarterback. That's what exactly, Jay, you want to hear from a guy you're going to pay more money than you have ever paid anyone in your franchise's history.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting point. I think it might have even been the final quote of Joe's press conference when he was talking about the importance of the offseason. And they're not installing the offense right now. This is almost like a time for experimentation where, yes, they're running the stuff they run, but
right.
he can work on different arm angles. He could, it's you think, okay, 3-step drop, this happens, then you have to do this. And he's like, the NFL doesn't work like that. Sometimes you have to go a different way. And he's got this amazing recall where you could see him immediately in a game in November flashing back to an OTA practice in May and recognizing something and saw something that worked in a practice in shirts and shorts and go to it. So it is important for these guys to be together. We talk all the time about the continuity and how they know the offense like the back of their hand because they've been with these coaches for so long, but schemes and those, they evolve, and it's important for these guys to put the time in on the field. Jamar said that chemistry with Joe is never going to go away. It's not like you have to reestablish it every offseason, but you can build on it and you can make it better. And that's kind of his goal, where he wanted to do more football stuff during the phase one of the offseason, because all the guys here were doing is basically calisthenics and lifting, and he wanted to do more football stuff. And then when they get into the football stuff this week, he shows up because it's important. These guys really do value every little piece that leads up to the season.
I just think if your best player is setting the standard and setting the model for that, setting the examples, what I'm trying to say, setting the example for the rest of the team to follow, then that's a powerful, powerful message. I mean, it's what it was in New England for all those years. It's what it was in Indianapolis and Denver with Peyton Manning. If your best player is your best preparer, you're good to go, because everybody else in the room knows they better meet that standard of not only physically working, but working on the X's and O's. And I think, we can expect to see that from the Bengals. Jay, think that's the coaching staff is one aspect of it, but the fact that the players work so hard to get into the playbook every single week and, all the time in the off season, that's a big part of their success over the last 2 years.
Yeah. And the flip side of that is it's what really kind of held this team back when Zach took over, where a lot of those older Marvin Lewis veterans that were used to being coddled a little bit and not having to go as hard in practice is what Zach wanted everybody to do when he got here. I mean, he had to turn that locker room over. It wasn't that some of those guys were getting older and getting on the downside of their career, but the buy-in wasn't there.
Yes,
and that's what really kind of held them back. And, Carlos Dunlap kind of being the poster child for that. And it's absolutely, if you got Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, you got all these guys that are the leaders on the team, Joe Mixon even, that are here and working right now. I mean, you got a room full of rookies in there right now, and they're looking at these guys for leadership and examples, and what better place to look than those guys?
We're looking at the Baltimore situation from about 500 miles away, 450 miles away. And it's different. It is the way it comes off in the national media is a lot different when Lamar Jackson, fresh from signing his new deal, is not and understood it's voluntary, but is not at their quote unquote football school. There's a different message there. No, don't you think?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I honestly, being on vacation, I wasn't aware that he wasn't there, but that's striking. I mean,
yes, it is.
You've got a brand new number one receiver in OBJ. I mean, and I don't know if he's there or not either, but yeah, you want that leader there. He may not need that time. He may not need the reps, but you want him there to start building the chemistry and the camaraderie. I mean, how many times do you hear teams say that the key, yes, you need talent and coaching, but it has to be a connected locker room to really take the team over the top. And that you don't just show up for training camp and have that turn that switch on. This is the time when that's built. This is when you have way more free time to sit around and I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on this, shoot the bull, let's say that. And
Yes. Yeah.
but that's where teams are built, and it is important. They do this stuff for a reason. It's not like we're paying you, we expect you to show up. They bring these guys in the offseason for a very specific reason, and only part of it is football.
And as we wrap up here on Joe Burrow, I would be remiss on this podcast if I didn't highlight what he did for 20 families being supported at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. The news breaking this week. It's a tremendous story that he is offering financial assistance to acquire mental health for those families dealing with children who are being treated at Children's Hospital. People, we both have kids. We understand what it is, what the pressures are of having kids, and sometimes they need medical attention, and the strain that puts on a family. For the Joe Burrow Foundation to acknowledge that and offer real assistance, and not say we're going to offer it to one or two or three people. Say, look, we can't choose who are the most qualified. Let's do it for as many people as we can, and as many people turned out to be 20 families. I do think there is something to the Joe Burrow vibe in terms of his generosity in the community. I think he's fully committed, bought in, and this is a way of him showing it.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of times these guys, they'll put their name on a foundation, but then they just kind of turn it over to a director, and they'll show up to an event or two a year. But you can tell by the way he was talking yesterday that he's very involved. He knows what's going on. He's making decisions. And I thought it was really interesting too, that they were talking about kind of getting in a rhythm and knowing the ins and outs of the off season. And he said that, yes, he knows what is needed in the off season. He knows what's needed during the season. And then he said, in these OTAs, you kind of figure out your schedule, and it frees you up to do some of these things that you really enjoy. And that, when he said that, he was referencing working with his foundation. It's not going fishing, not going to UFC fights, that kind. I mean, he enjoys that too. But that question came in the vein of the foundation, and he listed it as something he enjoys, not just something that he slaps his name on. And yes, it could still help somebody, but he digs in, and he's a big part of it.
Let's move back to T. Higgins for a moment. One of the T. Higgins quotes from Tuesday that stood out to me, Jay Morrison of The Athletic covering the Cincinnati Bengals, was his quote about Charlie Jones, saying that he is always, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he is always in the playbook. He is always working hard. He's one of the fastest guys out there that he's seen. Mm-hmm. You couldn't ask anything more from a rookie than that.
Yeah.
To me, for a guy who has his own contractual issues that he's trying to resolve off the field, and you see the team go out and draft a receiver. Now, granted, Charlie Jones may be more competition down the road for Tyler Boyd than T. Higgins. I get that.
Yeah, sure.
But still, the point of T. Higgins being aware of another receiver who's just new to the organization and making that kind of compliment, welcoming him into the brotherhood of the wide receivers, which is obviously a very tight and highly accomplished group, to me means a lot.
Yeah, it does. And it was not that long ago that T was in that position. So I'm sure he still has fresh memories of that, of how difficult it is. And you could see why he would appreciate. I mean, the caveat of that is it's been 2 days. I mean, it's been 2 days that T and Charlie have, yeah, right.
Sure.
But you're setting a tone, and he's seeing that from Charlie. And it was interesting yesterday. I'm sure Charlie, he gets his locker. He's like, oh, this is pretty cool. I'm right next to Jamar Chase, and T's a couple lockers down. And then yesterday there's a million media members around T and Jamar, and Charlie couldn't even get to his locker. So that he probably was maybe second guessing how cool that was to be next to those guys. But what better spot for him than to come in and be able to work with a Jamar Chase and a T. Higgins. And, if you're a 4th round pick, yeah, you better be in that playbook. Nothing's guaranteed at that point. And
correct.
It's a very, very good sign. And it's it is also a good sign. Burrow referenced it too. He talked about how much these rookies are engaged and invested, and they see that already. So for veterans to recognize, it's one thing. It's great for the rookies to do it, but then for veterans to see it and recognize it, it's another thing that's going to have legs into the season.
I'm going to read the quote because I want to do it justice. T. Higgins said, "Man, he's fast. He's on top of it in meeting rooms. You can't ask for a better rookie than that. He's coming in on top of his stuff and doing what he needs to do to get on the field. Hopefully he keeps being the guy he is and keeps producing on the field. That way he can get some run come game time." T. Higgins. I found that to be a very powerful quote, Jay. And
yeah, and it's important to know too, because a lot of times, what the Bengals were the only team in the league that did a one-day rookie mini camp. These other teams, they have them come in and they're force feeding these guys a lot of stuff. The Bengals said, come in, run around on the field for an hour, do some exercise, maybe catch a couple passes. They didn't ask a lot of them in terms of learning the offense to be ready for rookie camp. So for them to come in for day one of phase 2 of the offseason on Monday and Charlie to be in that position, it wasn't something he had to do. It was just something, like T said, he was on top of it. He took it upon himself to really dive in.
What did you think of Jamar Chase, his comments on Tuesday, his, acknowledgement that Joe Burrow winning is everything to Joe? Everything else is kind of secondary. He knows he wants to get paid and all of that. But Jamar Chase seemed to be right there on the same page and simpatico with T. Higgins and Joe Burrow. It seemed like a very much kumbaya, feel good type of environment inside the Bengals locker room. And I think that's a hell of a way to start phase 2 of off season.
Yeah, so just a little kind of an inside look at how this happened, where all the media were in the room, in the news conference room, waiting on Joe, and I was in the locker room waiting on T and Jamar to see if either one of them would talk. And they finally come in. I went up to Jamar, and he said, no media today. And I was like, well, you're not required to, but if you want to talk, you can. And it's like, we're here, and everybody else is in with Burrow, so if you want to talk. And he's like, there's no media today. And it's like, yeah, we're here. It's Monday in phase 1. It's Tuesday in phase 2. And he and T looked at each other with these wide eyes, and T's like, we better get our showers and get out of here quick. Because they knew that the scrum was going to be coming from the Joe Burrow presser. And neither one of them did it. I mean, Jamar talked to me one-on-one for about 5 minutes, and then he ran to get his shower. But by the time they got out of the shower, the media was in there, and both of them stood there and answered questions happily. For Jamar, it was a lot of the same stuff he had already answered with me. He easily could have said, I've already talked today. I've done my, and he could have left. And then T could have said, appreciate you guys, but don't want to talk today. And he could have walked out, and they didn't. They stood there and they talked, and there was this kumbaya sense to it, where they know they're not going to get grilled, so it's not going to be a difficult thing. But it's still, when you're talking about money and contracts, it's just, even when I asked Jamar about it, what's that?
It can get sticky. The conversations like that you can always make the mistake of saying the wrong thing that gets taken out of context, or you say something in frustration that you meant fully in context. But either way, those things can turn poorly quickly. And just the fact that the guys were relaxed, and when they did talk, I thought they spoke from their heart. That's the one thing, Jay, I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, but every time they do speak, I think it's mostly from the heart, and I think it's mostly sincere. And there's some cliche in everything, and any athlete's going to say to a reporter. But for the most part, I think it's free of cliche, and I think they speak from the heart most of the time.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you're talking about before, where they follow the leader. I mean, Joe Burrow, he doesn't talk a lot, but when he does, he's very open. He's very honest with his comments. On the defensive side, DJ Reader, Sam Hubbard, the leaders on this team, Ted Karras, they welcome the media. They embrace them. They give good answers, and they do the media. There's no jerks that run away and hate interviews. And I think these guys T and Jamar are young. They're still going into 4th year, going in their 3rd year, and they've just kind of followed that lead of, what if Joe is okay to talk to these guys, then we should be okay to talk to these guys too.
By the way, I want to give you some props here on your piece today, Wednesday, from Tuesday's work inside the Bengal locker room. Bengals benefiting from stars volunteering to put work over contract talks. Essentially what we've been talking about the last 25 minutes. But in your story, you kind of refer to what you just told me, and that is Chase initially said no media today, and then you work through him, and props to you to get him to talk. And any big takeaways from before the scrum began, the one-on-one that you did with Jamar?
Yeah, he was talking about that, what I mentioned earlier about how he did this work away from the team to he was really focused on getting in and out of his breaks and his releases and the football stuff. And then he talked about how excited he is to move around more in this offense. And I was like, you know, the first time we really saw that a lot was the Buffalo playoff game. Was that fun for you? And he said, yeah, he had a blast and he wants to do more of it. And he said, the interesting thing is, you know, if I move around, that means other guys are moving around. And he's like, T doesn't like being in the slot, but I'm trying to convince him that he can really be good in there. Not a lot, but you put him in there at times, create some routes for T in the slot, and it can really just open up this offense. And when he said that, I was thinking back, I think it was the 2018, the Bengals, they played a Thursday night game against the Ravens in week 2. It was their home opener. And AJ Green, who he played in the slot a little, but not a lot. He caught 3 touchdowns in the first 17 minutes of that game. And
I
all
remember
3
that.
came out of the slot. And it's like,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. You think about that. It's like that is, you know, T doesn't like to do it, but I'm sure he's not going to say no. And just hearing Jamar talk about, you know, the way they're already kind of crafting this offense to move guys around. You've got the new piece with Charlie Jones. Figure he'll be in the slot a lot, TB obviously, but you start moving them around, and like they did a lot with Jamar, just bringing him in motion into the backfield or starting him in the backfield and moving him out. All attention is on Jamar. So you start moving him around, and that just flusters the defense, and you've got guys that can play all over the place. I thought that was really interesting that he is totally on board with doing more of that.
Anything else you're working on, Jay?
To be honest, not much. It's the off season. I don't have. I've got a few things planned down the road, but right now, just trying to get my feet back on the ground from vacation and getting ready for next Tuesday's.
You look refreshed, may I add?
Oh,
you
thanks.
look refreshed, Jay. It was very refreshed and ready to get back at it.
Yeah, it was good to get in the locker room yesterday. You know, you get back from vacation, and then it's like, I got back Saturday night, and then Sunday's Mother's Day, and then Monday was like a second Mother's Day because we did one mom on Sunday and then another mom on Monday, and then you dive in on Tuesday, and it's a game changer. I think that's why companies pay for vacation, because they know you come back refreshed and energized and ready to go.
Well, I look forward to reading everything that you're working on, as I always do, on The Athletic regarding the Cincinnati Bengals. You and your colleague, Paul Dehner Jr., do an amazing job. I think everybody knows that by now, but I just want to give you your props, and also thank you for joining me on this podcast today. We covered a lot of material. I think it's going to be a fascinating couple of weeks leading up to the dark period in late June, you know, early to mid-July. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting storylines to follow, especially with the rookies. That's, you know, always the case. And which rookies, you know, might make a charge for, you know, starting job or two with the Bengals.
Yeah, that was kind of one of my points yesterday too, was just since I missed the week before, to try to go around and introduce myself to as many rookies as possible. And you're right, there's a lot of interesting angles. I don't know that we're going to see a Joe Burrow extension until probably closer to camp. I think he's going to wait out Justin Herbert and go over the top of him. But I do think it's going to happen before the first practice of training camp.
Do you think T gets done?
I don't know. Yesterday kind of leads me to believe that maybe there's some conversations going on that they're going to try to get it done. He seems so relaxed and confident, and it's hard to do. It's hard to, you know, because you haven't paid Jamar yet, but you know you're going to. And to the idea of sinking that much money into 3 guys, and then you've also got Orlando Brown making all that money. It's going to be tough to do, but you trust any team with the cap and managing that kind of thing, that the Bengals
No
front
one's
office
better.
is really
Yes.
good at that.
I would agree. And as we wrap up here, I just thought it was hilarious when T said, look, Mom, because T Higgins' mom was texting him and calling him and saying, is there a deal done? Because, there was a rumor a couple of weeks ago about, a T Higgins extension is all but done and finished. And he's no, not quite. And his mom texted him and said, is this true? And he texted her back and said, look, Mom, if there's a deal that gets done, you'll be the first to know.
That is funny, but it's also not true, because as soon as the deal's done, the agent is going to leak it to either Ian or Schefter, and it's going to be out there on Twitter. But yeah, it was funny because I'm sure T was, I don't know if annoyed's the right word, but you see a report out there that a deal's done and you're not even close, and you have to be scratching your head thinking, where did that come from?
Yes. Well, anyway, he is Jay Morrison, does a great job covering the Bengals for The Athletic. Follow him on Twitter at JMorrisonATH. And look forward to following your stuff, Jay. Very much appreciate it. Also, follow him and Paul Dehner Jr. They do a great job with their own podcast. Give that a little pub. How can people follow that?
Yeah, hear that podcast growling, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or just right on the Athletic app. We just recorded our latest one this morning, so it should be dropping Wednesday afternoon.
All right, he's Jay Morrison. I'm Mike Petralia-Trags. Thanks for downloading this episode of the JungleRoar podcast.